Picture this. You're driving across the American heartland. Your gas light flicks on somewhere between nowhere and absolutely nothing. You see a faded sign, a town name, maybe the ghost of a main street. You pull off the highway, thinking, bathroom, snacks, a $2 coffee, and then you notice something. There are no cars, no people. Some of the buildings are still furnished, chairs at the tables, calendars on the walls, but the calendars stopped in 1962, or 1984, or last Tuesday. The air smells wrong. The ground beneath you might literally be on fire. America is riddled with places like this. Towns that boomed, burned out, flooded, poisoned themselves, or simply got left behind when the interstate bypassed them by 14 miles. And that was that. 15 of these places exist on a spectrum from eerie to actively trying to kill you. And today we're ranking every single one. Hit that like button if you're brave enough to see number 1. And subscribe, because trust me, you are absolutely not ready for where this is going. Number 15. Glen, Texas/New Mexico. The town that Route 66 killed by saving it. Glen sits right on the Texas-New Mexico state line, which is appropriate because this town couldn't even commit to being in one state. Half of it is in Texas, half in New Mexico, and all of it is a husk. Population 0, officially. Though the Census Bureau lists it as unincorporated, which is bureaucratic code for we gave up trying to count. In its Route 66 heyday, the 1940s and 50s, Glen was a legitimate pit stop. Motels, diners, gas stations, the whole roadside America dream. The Little Juarez Diner once fed truckers from here to Amarillo. The State Line Bar exploited a wonderful legal loophole. Texas was dry, New Mexico wasn't, so the bar sat just barely on the New Mexico side and did extremely brisk business. See classic American entrepreneurship. Then Interstate 40 came through in the early 1970s, bypassing Glen by enough miles to make stopping there completely pointless. Within a decade, the town evaporated. Businesses shuttered, residents left, the diner closed. The bar, deprived of its thirsty Texans, went with it. What's left now is genuinely beautiful in that crumbling, melancholy way. Rusted gas pumps, collapsed rooftops, a motel where the room doors hang open like mouths mid-sentence. The pavement is cracked and reclaimed by scrubby desert grass. Wind moves through like it owns the place, which, at this point, it does. Locals from nearby San Juan, New Mexico, will tell you not to stop there after dark because of the occasional transient camp activity. But honestly, the real reason not to stop is simpler. There is nothing there. Not a drop of gas, not a candy bar, just the beautiful, hollow architecture of American ambition left out in the West Texas sun. Number 14. Thurmond, West Virginia. A town so dead, the post office still operates anyway. Thurmond, West Virginia, has a population of approximately 4 people. The exact number fluctuates, which is alarming when you're talking about a whole town. It is, by any reasonable measure, a ghost town. And yet, and this is the part that genuinely messes with you, Thurmond still has a functioning post office, one of the smallest in the entire United States. The National Park Service lists it as a historic district. Amtrak trains still stop there. There is a stop for 4 people. This place was electric once. Coal money flooded through Thurmond in the early 1900s like the New River flooded through everything else. The Glen Hotel was one of the most famous gambling establishments in the region, reportedly running non-stop card games for 14 years straight. 14 years. There are marriages that didn't last as long as those poker games. At its peak, Thurmond was processing more freight tonnage than Cincinnati. Then coal went sideways. The railroad declined. The floods got worse and more frequent. The New River Gorge around it became a national park, which is gorgeous, and also meant nobody could develop anything. The town just sat there, suspended in amber, surrounded by extraordinary natural beauty, whitewater rapids, ancient forests, ridgelines that look like God sketched them on a good day, and entirely devoid of human activity. So Reddit threads about Thurmond almost uniformly call it hauntingly beautiful and deeply unsettling. One user described walking through it at dusk and feeling like the town was watching me from inside the buildings. The post office worker, presumably, was just trying to finish their shift. Number 13. Rhyolite, Nevada. The ghost town with a bottle house, and absolutely no shame. Nevada has more ghost towns per capita than almost any state in the Union, which says a great deal about Nevada's general approach to consequences. Rhyolite is the most theatrical of them all, a town that peaked at somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 residents in 1908, then collapsed so completely by 1920 that one travel writer said it was as thorough a disappearance as if the earth had opened and swallowed it. But Rhyolite left behind the most gloriously absurd physical legacy. There is a house here built entirely of 50,000 glass bottles, beer and whiskey bottles mostly, mortared together into walls. Tom Kelly built it in 1906, a retired miner with more empty bottles than he knew what to do with, which is a sentence that explains a lot about Nevada in the early 1900s. The house still stands. It's weirdly charming. It is also structurally insane. Then there's the open-air sculpture park someone installed in the desert next to the ruins, including a life-sized sculpture of a naked man being escorted by ghostly figures. In the middle of the Mojave, with a ruined train depot as the backdrop, this is either profound art or the most Nevada thing that has ever happened, and honestly, the line between those two options is thinner than you'd think. The ruins of Rhyolite's three-story bank, its railway depot, and its school still stand against the Amargosa desert sky. There's no gas, no food, no services of any kind. Just the ghosts of 8,000 people, a bottle house, and a naked statue watching you from the edge of Death Valley National Park. Perfectly normal. Number 12. South Pass City, Wyoming. Where women got the vote and then everyone got sensible and left. The wind in South Pass City doesn't just blow, it negotiates. It tells you, in a low and persistent way, that you should reconsider every decision that brought you here, starting with the turnoff Wyoming Highway 28. At 7,805 feet above sea level, perched in the Wind River Range, like something a child placed there by accident, South Pass City is the kind of place where the summers are short and the winters are a character study in human stubbornness. It had its moment. Gold was discovered here in 1867, and within 2 years the population hit roughly 2,000 people, which for Wyoming in 1867 was essentially a metropolis. More importantly, in 1869, a Wyoming territory passed the first law in American history granting women the right to vote. Esther Hobart Morris, a South Pass City resident, is widely credited as a driving force behind that legislation. This tiny frozen town in the middle of Wyoming changed American democracy. Absolutely incredible. Then the gold ran out, which gold has a habit of doing, and people left at roughly the same pace they'd arrived. By 1872, South Pass City was basically finished. Today, the Wyoming State Historic Site maintains about 30 original structures, and a handful of interpreters in period clothing will cheerfully tell you about frontier life while the wind tries to knock them sideways. There is no gas station, there is no grocery store, there is no reliable cell service. There is, however, a lot of dramatic scenery and a deeply inconvenient altitude. One reviewer on a travel site wrote simply, "Drove 3 hours to get here. The wind took my hat immediately. Worth it." Wyomingans are a specific type of person. Number 11. Ducktown, Tennessee. The town that turned an entire valley into a preview of the apocalypse. Imagine the lush, impossibly green Tennessee hills, ancient forests rolling across ridges in every direction. And then imagine someone scraped a 100-square-mile wound into all of that and called it industry. That's Ducktown. Copper mining began here in the 1840s, and by the late 19th century, the smelting operations were releasing sulfur dioxide into the air in quantities so extreme that they killed every living plant within a 30-square-mile radius. Every tree, every blade of grass, every shrub. The resulting barren, red clay wasteland was so otherworldly that NASA used aerial photographs of the Copper Basin, as it became known, to train astronauts to recognize what a lifeless surface looks like. Let that land on you. They used a Tennessee valley to simulate the moon. Lawsuits arrived, including, famously, one from the state of Georgia, whose forests across the border were also dying. The company attempted to remediate the damage, and decades of grass planting and soil work have slowly brought some vegetation back to the hills. But the scars are still visible. You can see the copper-stained, rust-red ridges from miles away, bald against the surrounding green like a burn scar on the landscape. Ducktown itself, the town, hasn't been a boom town since copper stopped flowing in the 1980s. The Ducktown Basin Museum tells the story honestly, which is more than most industrial towns do. The old mine headframe still stands. The population hovers around 400. There's nothing defensive about Ducktown. The people there are fine. It's the landscape that sends a message. The landscape says, "We did this. We really did this." Number 10. St. Elmo, Colorado. Colorado's most photogenic ghost town will still leave you, stranded at 11,000 feet. St. Elmo gets called Colorado's best preserved ghost town. So often it's practically a marketing slogan, and it's not wrong. The original wooden storefronts, the old general store, the weathered cabins are all still standing. And on a bluebird summer day with the Chalk Creek Valley spread out below you and the collegiate peaks reflecting off everything, it is genuinely, breathtakingly beautiful. But St. Elmo sits at 10,567 feet above sea level, at the end of County Road 162, which closes entirely in winter and is optimistically described as rough in summer. The nearest town with a gas station is Nathrop, which is 20 miles of switchbacks away. The nearest hospital is in Salida. The nearest anything is a long drive on a road that has opinions about your vehicle's clearance. The town boomed in 1880 when gold and silver ore started coming out of the surrounding mountains, at a pace that made everyone briefly convinced they'd found paradise. By 1920, it was essentially empty. What saved the buildings was the same thing that almost killed the people. The altitude and cold are so extreme that wood rot slows, insects are scarce, and the isolation kept vandals away for decades. The chipmunks here are locally legendary. They are aggressive and they are everywhere, and they will absolutely take food out of your hand, and possibly your car if you leave a window cracked. Multiple travel reviewers have described being mugged by St. Elmo chipmunks, which at 10,000 feet, slightly altitude sick, watching a Victorian ghost town creak in the mountain wind hits different than you'd expect. But seriously, check your gas before you come up here. This cannot be overstated. Number 9. Cahaba, Alabama. America's most forgotten state capital is now a swamp. Cahaba, spelled Cahaba, in its heyday, was the first permanent capital of Alabama. Designated the seat of state government in 1820, it sat at the confluence of the Cahaba and Alabama rivers, which sounded like a good idea until both rivers proceeded to flood it, repeatedly, enthusiastically, and without mercy. The floods were catastrophic. The state legislature eventually got tired of conducting the business of government while wearing waders, and in 1826 they moved the capital to Tuscaloosa. Cahaba lingered. Cotton trade kept it alive, and by 1860 it had actually rebounded to about 3,000 residents, making it one of Alabama's larger cities. Then the Civil War arrived. The levees failed again. Yellow fever swept through twice, and by 1900 the population was in the dozens. Now Old Cahaba is a ghost town nature preserve. The Alabama Historical Commission maintains what's left, which is mostly foundations, a single artesian well, and extraordinarily thick vegetation that has consumed everything else. The rivers still flood the site regularly. Sometimes you can walk the trails, sometimes the site is literally underwater. It has retained this quality of being mostly inaccessible, which gives it the atmosphere of a ruin from a civilization that didn't survive, which is, technically, accurate. What locals from nearby Selma describe most is the isolation. The road into Cahaba winds through bottomland hardwood forest, and even on a dry day the humidity is so absolute it feels physical. Like the air is a warm, damp cloth pressed against your face. It is hauntingly beautiful. It is also completely without services, cell reception, or any mechanism by which you could summon help if you needed it. Number 8. Buford, Wyoming. Population, 1, then 0, then sold to a Vietnamese businessman at auction. Buford was never a ghost town in the traditional booming then busting sense. It was just a town that shrank so gradually it barely noticed. By 2012, its population was exactly one person, Don Salmons, who ran the tiny gas station and convenience store on Interstate 80. One man, one town. He had a sign made. Don lived there for 10 years alone, tending the world's loneliest truck stop at an elevation of 8,000 feet. enduring Wyoming winters that would drive most people to therapy. Then in 2012, he decided to sell. The entire town, post office, convenience store, gas station, the works, went to auction. It sold for $900,000, which sounds like a lot until you remember you're buying an entire municipality, or even if that municipality has a population of 0. The buyer was Pham Dinh Nguyen, a Vietnamese businessman who renamed it Phin Deli Town Buford and used it as a marketing platform for his coffee brand. This is among the most purely American stories ever told. Frontier ghost town sold at auction, purchased by an overseas investor, renamed after a Vietnamese coffee. Walt Whitman couldn't have written this. The store still exists. It still sells gas and snacks. The population is 1 or 2 depending on the season and who's staffing it. The wind comes screaming off the Laramie Range constantly and without apology. Yelp reviews describe it primarily as a place where you can get gas in Wyoming, which is, given Wyoming's gas station density, more valuable than it sounds. But don't mistake Buford for a town. It's a convenience store with delusions of civic identity, sitting alone on the highest point of Interstate 80 between the 2 coasts, daring you to stop. Number 7. Kennecott, Alaska. The most isolated ghost town in America, and the bears know it. Getting to Kennecott is itself a commitment that filters out the casually curious. You fly into Anchorage. You drive the Richardson Highway and the Glen Highway for hours through scenery so overwhelming it starts to feel like visual noise. You turn onto the McCarthy Road, 60 miles of unpaved gravel, no services, with a sign at the start that essentially reads, "If your car breaks down here, that is now your life." You cross the Kennecott River on a footbridge. You take a bus or hike to town. At the end of all that is Kennecott, a National Historic Landmark perched on a glacial moraine in the Wrangell St. Elias Wilderness, the largest national park in the United States, bigger than Switzerland, where the grizzlies outnumber the tourists on a good day and the weather turns without warning in any season. The Kennecott mines were an engineering miracle. Beginning in 1903, copper ore so rich it averaged 70%. Pure copper was extracted from the mountains above and processed here at an industrial scale that still seems impossible given the location. The company built a company town, 14 buildings, including a hospital, a school, a recreation hall, all painted red and white, all clinging to a glacial hillside at 2,000 feet. The mines closed in 1938. Workers left literally overnight. Furniture remained. Medical equipment stayed in the hospital. Machinery stayed in place. The place froze, in time and also literally, given the permafrost. The National Park Service now maintains it, and guided tours run in summer. In winter, Kennecott returns to exactly what it always was beneath the copper rush, a tiny cluster of buildings surrounded by thousands of square miles of wilderness that will kill you if you're not paying attention. Number 6. Ruby, Arizona. 3 massacres, 1 ghost town, 0 reasons to linger after sunset. Ruby sits in the Santa Cruz Highlands of southern Arizona, about 10 miles from the Mexican border. Back roads, rolling grasslands, sky so enormous it feels like a ceiling lifted. And it carries with it a history so violent that even Arizona, a state not known for shyness about its rough past, treats Ruby with a kind of respectful distance. The town incorporated in the early 1900s around lead and zinc mining. It had a store, a school, a post office. It also, between 1920 and 1921, had 3 separate massacres. The first involved the murder of 2 store owners and their baby by bandits crossing up from Mexico. The second, a reprisal attack. The third, another assault on the store the following year. More people were killed, and the trials were sensational. The story was ugly in ways that the desert sun bleaches but doesn't erase. Mining continued until 1941, when the ore ran out and Ruby died for good. Today it's private property. You can visit with a permit, and the ruins are remarkably intact. Stone foundations, mill structures, a pond ringed by cottonwoods. It's beautiful and deeply unsettling simultaneously, the way that places with embedded violent histories sometimes are. Border proximity adds a contemporary layer of tension. The area sees significant cross-border traffic. Ranchers nearby have described finding camps and discarded belongings. The remoteness that defined Ruby in 1910 is precisely the same remoteness that defines it now, and remoteness is morally neutral. It doesn't care what you use it for. The county road in is rough. Cell service is non-existent. The nearest gas is back in Nogales. Don't say we didn't tell you. Number 5. Bombay Beach, California. A Salton Sea resort town that didn't get the memo about the sea dying. There is a submerged basketball hoop in the Salton Sea. It stands maybe 15 feet offshore, backboard still attached, net long gone, rusted orange-red, surrounded by dead tilapia. Someone put that hoop there when the waterline was higher. The water receded and the hoop stayed, and now it just stands there in the apocalyptic brine like a monument to California's absolute refusal to accept when something is over. Bombay Beach was built in the 1950s when the Salton Sea, California's largest lake, formed by accident in 1905 when an irrigation canal broke and flooded the Salton Sink for 2 years, was a legitimate resort destination. Frank Sinatra played nearby. Water skiing happened. People bought lots and built homes with genuine optimism. Then the Salton Sea began dying. Agricultural runoff raised the salinity past what most fish could survive. Algae blooms exploded. The smell, hydrogen sulfide from decomposing algae and fish, became the dominant sensory feature of the region, described by locals as low tide at a sewage plant. Property values collapsed. Residents left. The ones who stayed couldn't. Today, Bombay Beach has a population around 400, many of them elderly, low-income residents who bought here when prices were already at rock bottom and have nowhere else to go. The median household income is somewhere around $20,000, against a California average north of $80,000. The beach is ringed with dead fish bones, rusted trailers, and, inexplicably, their art installations. Bombay Beach has developed an eccentric artist colony drawn by the grotesque beauty of the decay. Locals online describe a very specific experience: arriving, falling in love with the weirdness, getting the smell in your clothes, and leaving with complicated feelings about California dreaming. Number 4. Gilman, Colorado. The most perfectly preserved ghost town in America is sealed behind a fence and is actively poisoning the Eagle River. Gilman, Colorado isn't a ghost town you can wander through. It's a ghost town you look at from a pullout on Highway 24, peering through a chain-link fence at the most complete and intact abandoned company town in the American West. And you think, that is genuinely beautiful, and I cannot under any circumstances go in there. The town was built in the 1880s, clinging to a cliff above the Eagle River, and zinc and lead mining made it thrive for decades. The company owned everything: the houses, the store, the roads. Workers rented their homes from the company, bought their food from the company store, and had their paychecks garnished to cover it. The company town model, in other words, feudalism with better plumbing. When Gilman was shuttered in 1984, abruptly, with residents given short notice to vacate, the EPA was already circling. The contamination was staggering. Heavy metals had leached from the mine tailings into the soil and the Eagle River for nearly a century. The site was added to the Superfund National Priorities list. The entire town, still completely furnished, still standing, houses with dishes in the cabinets, was fenced off and is legally inaccessible. The Eagle Mine Superfund cleanup has cost hundreds of millions of dollars and is ongoing. The Eagle River downstream still shows elevated metal concentrations. And up on the cliff, visible from the highway, Gilman sits exactly as it was left in 1984. A 19th century mining town preserved by the same toxic contamination that made it uninhabitable. It is arresting and horrible, and somehow gorgeous in the flat Colorado light. Do not try to climb the fence. The contamination is real, the private property laws are very much in effect, and the cliff below the town is not joking. Number 3. Bodie, California. California's most famous ghost town once had 65 saloons and a murder rate that made the devil blush. Bodie sits at 8,375 feet in the eastern Sierra, and the landscape around it looks like someone removed every softening element from the world and kept only the essential, brutal skeleton. No trees, no shade. Wind that comes sideways across the Great Basin Desert, carrying enough grit to sandpaper your face in 90 seconds. The sky above Bodie is the most aggressive blue you've ever encountered. It looks painted on, vivid and indifferent simultaneously. At its peak in 1879, Bodie had 10,000 residents, 65 saloons, and a reputation for violence so thorough that a little girl whose family was moving there supposedly wrote in her diary, "Goodbye, God, like we are going to Bodie." The murder rate was such that the phrase, "Bodie's not so bad man," was used to describe someone who was, elsewhere, genuinely terrifying. This town had a bad man's bad man. There were shootings most days. The red light district operated without meaningful constraint. Freight wagons brought whiskey faster than food. The mines produced $35 million in gold and silver, which is roughly $1.2 billion in today's money, most of which left as quickly as it arrived. By 1942, Bodie was almost entirely empty. The state took it over as a historic park in 1962 and adopted a policy of arrested decay. They don't restore, they stabilize. They preserve the deterioration. The buildings lean, the paint peels, the furniture sits in the houses exactly as it was left, and rangers enforce a strict rule. Nothing leaves Bodie, not a nail, not a piece of wood, not a rock. Legend holds that anyone who takes something from Bodie suffers the Bodie curse. Letters from former visitors returning stolen items, each accompanied by stories of catastrophic bad luck, are displayed at the park. The rangers swear they are real. Whether you believe in curses or not, returning to a place that looks like this to drop off a rock you stole 30 years ago is its own kind of haunting. Number 2. Picher, Oklahoma. The most poisoned town in American history. In 2008, the federal government did something it almost never does. It paid the residents of an entire American town to leave. Not relocated them for a dam or a highway, bought them out. Told them, as directly as the federal government ever tells anyone anything, this place is no longer compatible with human life. Please go. Picher, Oklahoma, was the epicenter of the tri-state mining district. Lead and zinc mining so intensive, it ran from the 1910s through the 1970s and made southeastern Kansas and northeastern Oklahoma one of the most productive mining regions in the country. It also left behind 70 million tons of mine tailings, the crushed, lead and cadmium-contaminated rock waste of a century of extraction, piled into giant mounds called chat piles that still dominate the landscape like gray, toxic hills. The water in Picher was contaminated decades before anyone acted on it. Children's blood lead levels were measured at catastrophic concentrations. The CDC considers 3.5 micrograms per deciliter elevated for children. Picher children in the 1990s were being measured at multiples of that. The learning disabilities, developmental delays, and physical ailments documented in the community are, by any honest accounting, a public health atrocity. A tornado struck Picher in May 2008, killing 6 residents and destroying much of what remained, as if the universe wanted to be efficient about it. By 2009, buyouts were complete and the population was essentially zero. One man, Gary Linderman, refused to leave for years. He died in Picher in 2015, the last permanent holdout. The chat piles remain. You can drive through what's left of the town. The streets are intact, some foundations, the old school marquee. The Superfund designation covers 40 square miles. Locals from nearby Miami, Oklahoma, describe a specific atmosphere when passing Picher. Not spooky, not cinematic. Just sad. The specific sadness of something that didn't have to happen this way, and did anyway. Number 1. Centralia, Pennsylvania. A town built over a fire that has been burning since 1962 and will burn for another 250 years. In 1962, a trash fire was set in an abandoned strip mine pit at the edge of Centralia, Pennsylvania. This was normal at the time. Communities burned their refuse this way routinely, but the pit was connected to a coal seam. The coal seam caught fire, and the fire has not gone out since. That was 63 years ago. The Centralia mine fire has been burning continuously through the coal seams beneath what was once a town of 1,100 people, and geologists estimate it will continue burning for at least 250 more years. This fire will outlive everyone alive today. It will burn until it has consumed every accessible seam beneath the mountain, which is a timeline measured not in decades, but in centuries. The fire's effects are physical and inescapable. The ground above it heats unpredictably. Sinkholes open with no warning, swallowing the pavement of Route 61, which the state eventually had to abandon and reroute. Carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide seep up through cracks in the earth. In winter, the snow melts above the burn zones while remaining feet deep around them. Steam rises from vents and fissures in the hillside. The area smells like a coal furnace from underground. The residents were evacuated through the 1980s. Most accepted buyouts. By 1992, the state condemned all remaining structures. A handful of residents fought legal battles to stay and won the right to remain for their lifetimes. As of recent counts, fewer than 10 people still live in Centralia, and the state will reclaim the land when the last of them passes. What exists now is a street grid with no streets, the pavement torn up, the blocks overgrown with scrubby trees and meadow grass. A few foundations, the remaining residents' houses visible behind fences, and Route 61's abandoned section, which graffiti artists have decorated so thoroughly it's known globally as the Graffiti Highway, though the state buried it with gravel in 2020 to stop trespassers. The fire burns. You can feel the warmth from cracks in the hillside. On a cold day, the steam rising from the vents looks ghostly and cinematic. Locals from the surrounding coal region describe an almost theological discomfort about Centralia. Not fear exactly, something closer to grief. A community consumed, not by flood or economic collapse or time, but by the earth itself, from beneath, slowly, relentlessly. There are no gas stations. There is no town. There is a fire, burning in the dark, underground, in the place where a community used to be. And it has been burning your entire life. So there it is, 15 American ghost towns, ranging from the beautifully melancholy to the actively chemically hostile. From a man selling a one-person municipality at auction to a fire that will outlive your grandchildren's grandchildren. From lead-poisoned children to Salton Sea basketball hoops rusting in apocalyptic brine. America does not do ghost towns small. When an American town dies, it commits. What all 15 of these places share, underneath the rust and the ruin and the occasional Superfund designation, is the specific American energy of once believing, completely and without reservation, that this was the place, that the gold was real, that the railroad would come, and that the resort would fill, that the fire would go out. It didn't, and somehow that makes these places more human, not less. Drop a comment telling me which one shocked you most. My money is on people being genuinely blindsided by Picher. It is the most quietly devastating entry on this list, and it absolutely deserves to be talked about more. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't. We've got a video coming next week that makes this list look cheerful. We're going to 15 American towns where the population didn't just leave, they were told they couldn't come back. That one's going to leave a mark. I'll see you there.